Well, hey everyone, I'm Justin Robbins, founder and principal analyst at Metric Sherpa, and I am back with another contact center conversation. This week, I get to sit down with Jeremy Hyde. Jeremy's the senior director of customer service at Sun Country Airlines. He's on the board of the Midwest Contact Center Association and just an all-around stand-up guy, someone whose perspective I've come to trust and appreciate. So, Jeremy, thanks for sitting down with me and having this conversation today.
Anytime, man. You give me a call. I'm happy to hop on with you. So
I love it. We are talking about a topic that I know is near and dear to both of us, and it's culture inside of the contact center. I feel like there's a whole bunch of knots we can unravel when we think about an environment that often people don't aspire to work in or stay in. We think about the nature of the interactions that so often can be volatile or undesirable or just downright messy. And then compound that with all of the pressure that gets put on the contact center in terms of cost and compliance and all of these things. It's a recipe for disaster, which I think is why for so many, it is exactly that. It's a place of high turnover and frustration. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Before we jump into any of that, people may not be familiar with you, with Sun Country, with all of the things that you've done. Can you maybe just introduce yourself to all of us and share a little bit about your background and where you're at today?
sure. Yeah. So as you said, I currently serve as the senior director of customer service for Sun Country Airlines. Um, we are, I think, like the either 11th or 13th largest carrier in the U.S. Somebody will probably get mad at me for not remembering which of those it is, but we're kind of outside of the big ones that you would rattle off. Regionally focused, based out of Minneapolis. Our bread and butter is taking Minnesotans to warm destinations during the winter. Think Cancun, think St. Martin, Caribbean, that sort of thing. And during the summer, taking them to great places like Seattle and Montana and Boston, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a northwest during the winter and an east-west during the summer. I've been doing this for a while now. Got my start out of college. Got out of college, was going to work in human resources, couldn't find a job, needed to pay the bills. So as a lot of people probably will tell, I had a friend that was working in a contact center, referred me, got my start there. And like many others, and as you were kind of speaking to a moment ago, those first few years, I thought likely I would move out of the contact center. Maybe I would become like an account manager or, something along those lines, but get out of the contact center space. Kind of through that time, though, I did continue to apply myself, grow, develop. I had some leaders that were investing in me, giving me opportunities, challenging me when I needed to be challenged. And one day I kind of woke up and realized, like, hey, I'm making a career of this thing. There's a lot of opportunity. I'm good at it. I'm actually enjoying it. I think I started to see how much you can see when you're sitting in the contact center. And then as a result, how much you can influence. I mean, you get to see, for better or worse, just about every aspect of the business. So yeah, I've spent the last 15, maybe almost 20 years kind of growing and find myself in this role now. The other thing that you mentioned, I sit on the board of directors for the Midwest Contact Center Association, and that is a nonprofit contact center networking, education, training association. We've got chapters based out of Minneapolis and Chicago, and just really all about kind of building community, bringing opportunities to people locally, letting folks learn and get to know their local community of contact center leaders, which is it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Three things I love about what you shared, Jeremy. One is your story is my story, and it's the story of so many others in terms of thinking our trajectory is going to take us one place and then finding that it brings us to the contact center and then having that moment where we decide we're all in.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it's a really cool thing. And just so many of the leaders that I see that have had the greatest impact on their organization are the ones that lean in to what the work inside of the contact center can do versus running away from it. So I love that. Second thing I think is super awesome is your intentionality around local community for people who do this work. I think it can be isolating, it can be challenging, it can be a lot of things. And having intentional and curated places to connect is so valuable. So I love that. Third thing is, even though you didn't mention Wilmington, North Carolina as one of the great spots that Sun Country flies to in the summer, it is great to have Wilmington, North Carolina as one of those places. And I still am going to hold you to one of these times. You and your family should definitely take a trip and come on down and see us, because we're happy to come to Minnesota as well. But no, it's cool. I'm glad to have you on the conversation. And as someone who has a background in HR, I think this is especially an interesting topic for us to explore. I'm curious, Jeremy, as you think about some of the early experiences that you had in your role, what shaped your perspective on not just leading in a contact center, but being intentional about the culture you want to create? I think it's easy to write off contact centers and, hey, people, you're just going to have attrition. You're just going to have these issues. It's just part of what it is. But I believe that you're a person who says it doesn't have to be that way. What were some of the early things that were formative for you in believing that?
Yeah. A couple things. One is both good and bad leaders. A lot of the foundational pieces of what make me who I am, the learnings that I've had came from either really bad or really good leaders. I learned maybe equally as much from both. The really bad ones, like I never want to be that, and I never want that to be part of the organization that I'm a part of. And then the really good, I mentioned my success isn't mine alone. There are many people that gave me opportunity, that saw my potential, that called me on my stuff when I needed to be called on my stuff, and said, "Hey, you can't do that," or "Hey, let's focus on this." And so I think that's a big piece of things, for sure. I draw a lot. I mean, as I've kind of grown up through my career, through the contact center, I draw a lot from like, how did I feel when I was in XYZ role? What did it feel like? What might people be thinking about? Now I'll acknowledge, like, the more time and space, the less, truly connected to that time I am. Like I do recognize that, but I do try to think back to those moments and use that to kind of inform the way that I think about changes, about communication, about the type of atmosphere that we're creating. And you mentioned something. You mentioned attrition and some of these things. Culture, defining and building a certain type of culture doesn't just have to be about our morality and values. There's a business justification for these things, right? Like, I don't want to have to constantly churn through people and pay for more unproductive time and spend time recruiting and be understaffed. And it can be both, right? I mean, hopefully we have that thing within us innately where we want to develop a certain type of environment. But again, there's a business justification here as well. And so I won't act like it's just like a moral high ground that I'm taking. It's a bit of both. Like, we went through a process actually a few years ago, Sun Country, within my team. Our attrition had skyrocketed. It was at a bad place, and we needed to understand what was driving it, and we had to change it. And as much as I cared about why people were leaving, I also knew from a business perspective, like, this is not working, and this is painful. And so, that led us going through the process. So I think those are just some of the things, though. Like I said, a big piece of it is looking back and the people that have shaped me and kind of putting myself back into the shoes that some of my team members are in today.
I think it's important that you called out the necessity of making it tangible. And when I think about what is the right thing to do as a leader in any environment, it is balancing the needs of the business that you're a part of with the people entrusted to your care, with the stakeholders that you've got, dependencies on or that are depending on you. And that's why it's complicated. That's why it's not as easy as just walking into an environment and trying to be a cheerleader, or just walking in and trying to be a really good coach, or all of these things. It's not one thing in isolation. It's being able to take a step back and seeing the entirety of it. And I think to your point about the contact center getting to have this unique perspective on all of the parts of the business, I actually think that sets up uniquely to create one of the most holistic and connected cultures inside of a business. And I want to explore that a little bit more with you. But I think part of it, as you mentioned, is just recognizing that there's business impact on this. It's not just an intangible, warm and fuzzy thing. Culture is about connectedness and ultimately driving the outcomes that we're aspiring to on all fronts, whether it's employee performance, business results, it's all of those things. Now, one of the things that is foundational to setting a culture that I think not only can stick with our employees, but also has resonance with people outside of the contact center, is one that's aligned to the organization's broader values. It's one that's connected to what happens outside of the cues. What, from your perspective, are some of the things that organizations can do to align the culture with the contact center with the broader values and drivers of the organization?
Yeah, we're actually going through a process right now to do this. We do, for the last 4 or 5 years within my team, we've been doing an annual employee satisfaction survey. And one of the areas that stood out to me this last round was kind of that connection to a bigger goal, understanding how the work that we do is bigger than just, I'm creating a widget or, whatever the case may be. And I think that's probably common in our environment. It's hard to for some to understand the bigger picture and like really connect the why. And so at the same time that I was noticing this trend in those results, we also kind of refreshed our values, our employee value proposition and values and that sort of thing. And so now we're going through a process right now for each of our roles and teams where we're kind of looking at, all right, what are the primary tasks of the role? What are the primary goals and performance measures as we have in place today? And how do these things align to our values and our employee value proposition? If we say that as an organization, we win when we insert thing here, then like how are we supporting that vision and that goal? And so we're working through right now to see like do our things connect? How do they connect? And how can we consciously articulate that, directly articulate that, rather than leaving people to connect those dots on their own, saying, this performance measure, this goal, this connects to this value, the things that we say that are important for our organization, these 4 things, this is how we're supporting each one of them so that each individual can see the way that they contribute. So I think a process like that can be really helpful. I know, Jeff Toyster talks about having a vision for your customer service team. I think that could be a similar, like, good process, making sure, again, though, that it supports and is aligned with the broader mission or vision of the organization. I think we have to be careful not to create too many things that we expect our team members to know and be able to recite by memory. And so it just has to be a really simple, easy thing. Like, I do this is my job, This is how it supports the organization. This is the value that I bring day in and day out.
Mm. A few things I want to reinforce there, Jeremy. For people who are watching this, being able to outline the we win when moments, I think is a valuable exercise, not just as leaders, but for your people to be able to recognize what does that look like? What does it look like for your team to win, and then for your business to win? I think the second thing is the connectedness. You talked about what it means for each individual to understand the role that they play in making that possible. I think that's so valuable to have that just discussed and known throughout our organizations. Third thing you reminded me of was a mentor of mine who would talk about intentional pre-decisions. And what he meant with that is we in this was not in the contact center, but it is very applicable, and it's about how we often are going to find ourselves in a whole bunch of circumstances where we've got to make momentary decisions, and whether it's around coaching, whether it's around what we say yes to or not, around what we prioritize or not. And it's about having these conversations around, hey, when we're in these moments, what are the intentional pre-decisions that we're going to make so we know what to do when, so that we don't lose sight of what matters most. We don't lose sight of the thing that's most important. It's that type of, again, intentionality around defining success and knowing what are going to be the things that should move us in that direction. So love that you just communicating it and being open and transparent about it, I think is really key to
One of the themes I'm hearing emerge kind of as we're talking about, and you called it out early on, is just kind of that connection to the business and the business outcomes. And just, I think one thing I want to say on that, I think often in contact centers and customer experience teams, it almost feels, I think people have this thing where it feels wrong to try and make it about a business justification or a business outcome. But then we just kind of wander around with no real endpoint in mind. And in some cases, perhaps try to build things that aren't in alignment to the rest of the organization. And then they don't work and they don't stick and others don't support them. And, you'll hear people talk about like, I want to create and whatever brand they think that is just amazing. They want to create that within their organization, but it fails to acknowledge they are not that organization. What is unique about their industry, their company, where they sit in the marketplace? When we do these things off on this random island just because we want it to feel good, it doesn't work. And so, I don't know, maybe I'm beating a dead horse here, but I just think it's incredibly important that we understand our organization, we understand the context of the work that we do, kind of the guardrails that are in place and how we can support things. And again, don't just chase whatever feels good in the moment.
Two things I want to call out here, Jeremy. The first, you got me really excited, and you actually affirmed something that has been unwinding inside of my head. I've been writing a post that by the time everyone's watching this should be live, and it's exploring the difference between aimless wandering and purposeful exploration. And my belief is, as an outsider looking in, I can't tell the difference whether you are someone who is wandering around aimlessly or you are someone who is purposefully exploring. And what I see a lot of organizations do is find the spot of aimless wonder, where they either are told something or they don't actually know why they're doing it. But the measure of success is that there's activity happening and that there's meetings being held and strategies being strategized. And in reality, it's not getting them anywhere, versus having really clear idea around what you're doing and being able to make smart experiments to take calculated risks. But the challenge is, if you don't know what to look for and what to expect, the two can look the same from the outside. And I think that's a trap a lot of people fall into. So I'm with you there. I think that idea of just kind of haphazardly doing things is a place where a lot of people fall victim. The other thing I'll connect back on is something that I've given talks about for a while now and have started workshopping with a number of organizations, and is moving this idea of becoming more than a motto. And many of us fall victim to the taglines or to the promises or to the mission, vision, values. And for most organizations, they are just words. They are not connected. They're not reinforced through the rituals that we have as businesses, whether that's the things we incentivize, whether it's the things we coach on. It's just disconnected. And again, unintentional. Yep. But I think for a lot of us, we've just fallen into this trap where we say a lot and we feel good because we've said it, but it's not internalized by our leaders, by our people, and therefore it's not muscle memory. It's not just showing up. And everything that's happening in our business today, I think, is coincidence. I think it's coincidence that we provide great service or not. I think it's coincidence that coaching has impact or not. A lot. I think that I probably am going to unravel a bigger ball of knots here, but to me, that's all culture. All of that, everything manifests out of culture. Add to that the complexity I think a lot of us find ourselves in right now is where our teams are not all in an office anymore either. And I think being in a hybrid or fully kind of dispersed setup can just add even more complication on top of that. I'm just curious, Jeremy, what's your take on those environments? Are there certain things that organizations can do to make sure that the nature of where their team sits doesn't further complicate an already messy topic?
Yeah, I mean, we're fully remote, as I'm sure many out there are. And while certainly we have a pretty strong presence and footprint in the Minneapolis area, we are expanding every day. You know, we're hiring all over the place. And, you know, when everybody started going home for COVID, there was a lot of discussion about like, how do we do this? And like, how do we train? How do we recruit? How do we coach? And I think what's funny about so many of these things is it actually is no different in person versus remote. How do you train? Like there might be some things that are a little bit different, but like generally it's the same. It's like maybe did you have a bad training or a good training in person? Like if you had a bad training, it's just going to be a little bit worse remotely. If you had a good training program, it should probably be fine. So many of these things, it's not really different. What is different though is social interactions, informal interactions, and even social and informal learning that happens because you just happen to be in the same physical location as your peers. And so, you know, bumping into Justin while I fill up my coffee, that's no longer going to happen. And overhearing Justin say a really remarkably intelligent thing because I sit close to him, that is not going to happen. And so it is harder. I think you mentioned the word isolation, like it's more isolating, and we definitely have to work harder and we have to be more intentional about trying to develop these things. I think this is another space where we have to do things that make sense within our culture, within our organization, that sort of thing. You know, we like to do a lot of sharing travel things. We're an airline, right? So like we should lean into that and incorporate that into kind of the engagement and the sharing that we do. So we'll do things where we're sharing pictures and stories about places where we've traveled. And when new employees join, you know, they tell us the bucket list of places they'd like to travel. And we tell them about one of the favorite places that we've traveled to, those sorts of things. But yeah, I think, you know, two things. One is what specific connections will you build on behalf of your team members? Is it a mentorship program or whatever? And then how can you, I don't know if facilitate is quite the right word, but create the opportunities for them to create their own relationships that you're not trying to manage. I think that's one of the things actually that's most difficult is we go into a remote environment and now we feel responsible. And I've wrestled with this over the last 5 years myself. It's like, I feel responsible for everybody's engagement and relationships because they can't just have lunch together or bump into each other grabbing coffee. but it's unrealistic to think that I'm going to manage everybody's relationships. And so in place of that, what are the things that we can do to encourage, but not try to take control of, because it just won't work.
Yeah. That acknowledgement of what you can control versus what you can shape and influence, I think, is important. And a lot of people maybe carry undue burdens because they try to go too far. One thing that I've found that's been helpful for myself and teams that I've led, or even teams that I've worked with, is actually this exercise that looks at the 4 dimensions of employee connection. And what this really says is that every single one of us on our journey as employees are seeking the answers to 4 questions. The first is, what do I get? The second is, what can I give? The third is, do I belong? And the fourth is, how can we grow? And you can kind of overlay these into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can do all sorts here, but really what it's saying at the first 2 levels, what do I get and what can I give? These are actually tied to things that more traditionally would align with employee satisfaction. These are like, what am I getting paid? What are my benefits? What are the hours? Do the skills and abilities that I have, do they align with the types of work that I'm doing? But then when we start to get higher dimensions of connection, do I belong? And how do we grow? Now, this is where we're talking about relationship. We're talking about discretionary effort. We're talking about the things that actually drive engagement. And for me as a leader, while I can't give every employee the answer for them to those questions, what I can do is create environments and experiences where we help them navigate them and find out what that means for them. That, I think, as a leader, is the place where we need to be sitting when it comes to understanding engagement. Is what does that struggle look like for all of our employees, our leaders? Everybody is walking through that. That, I think, is part of the burden of leadership. And what I think is a bit unfair is if we look at turnover, which again, turnover is a big problem in contact centers, at least many of them. Often we attribute it to a leader. And when I look at the research that even I've done on frontline associates, often when I ask them, why did you leave your last job? The highest percentile says it's because of a bad boss. Mm-hmm. I don't want to, I haven't met that boss, but I've met a lot of bosses. And I would say that the majority of leaders that I've met are not bad leaders, but they are operating within bad systems. And I'm curious, Jeremy, how much do you think of the turnover problem is actually tied to broader culture and engagement issues than it is to an individual leader being, quote unquote, bad?
Yeah. What drives attrition? It's a big messy thing to try and unpack and unravel, and often no 2 environments or centers or are the same. But you're right, though. It's like you have to kind of look at multiple things. Like, all right, what are the systems? What's the culture? How do we onboard? How do we connect people to the organization, the people, mission, etc.? How do we set our leaders up? How well are they equipped to have certain types of conversations, to grow and develop, to hold accountable, to set expectations? Then there's a whole bunch of things that I think kind of falls into that like get bucket you were talking about, like scheduling, for example. Scheduling is one of the top reasons people leave a company. So maybe I love it here. Maybe my boss is pretty great, but I have to get my kid off to school at whatever time. And if the schedule can't meet that requirement, then I'll go and find a job somewhere else. So there's just kind of some basic things there. So when we were trying to understand our attrition problem, I think we were kind of going through that process to understand like what is happening. Who are the people that are staying and who are the people that are leaving? What's different about their experiences, their wants, their expectations, their requirements? There were certain things where, um, frankly, I said, you know what? If we can see a clear trend here, at some point the why may not matter as much as just like acknowledging that. So there was a certain type of employee that wasn't going to work for us. We should stop hiring that type of an employee. Like, we're not good for them. They're not good for us. Like, why are we trying to force a fit here? Whereas this type of an employee, they love working here. You know who loves working here? Part-time, work from home, love to travel. Like, there's a certain type of employee that loves working for Sun Country and is very unlikely to leave, especially if we get them, past that first like 90 days. So that's where we've really dug in and focused in is I'm not going to try and force a fit where a fit isn't a fit. I'm going to understand who we are, what our value is, who's likely going to want to be here, and we're going to target those people. But I think getting back to your original question, yes, like what employees often perceive as a bad boss is probably often one, either that boss is like a victim of circumstance, so to speak, like the systems, the process, the culture, and or they haven't been properly developed to apply the systems accurately and consistently and know how to identify, oh, I need to go and look a little bit further into this. I need to throw up the red flag and get some help. But it's when people will be out there talking about bad bosses in the contact center and horrible, I get a little frustrated. I think I could sense that in you as well, because I'm like, the people that are leading in contact centers care so much, so deeply. It is not often that they're just jerks that don't care. And so, one, like, let's be nice to them. Two, let's put them in the right position so that they can look like the heroes that probably they are day in and day out.
Jeremy's so good. I want to go back to that right fit thing that you mentioned. I think I don't want to glance by the value in organizations understanding who they are, what matters to them, and then who's the right type of individual to step into that environment. I'm just curious, as you think about other things that you've done around employee engagement, or just kind of practices that you have in place to drive the right type of culture inside of your organization. Is there anything you found that's been particularly effective for your team?
We've done a whole bunch of stuff. Me and my team spend a lot of time thinking about employee satisfaction, culture, and engagement. And don't get me wrong, like, I won't say that we're perfect. Like, just like any other organization out there, like, there's areas we're doing awesome, and there's areas where we still have work to do. I'm not one of those people that's going to show up and act like, oh, we're just nailing everything. One of the things that we do that I love, that our employees really seem to love, and honestly, like, actually, I'm going to tell you two things. The first one is just so simple, and I think people would probably laugh or roll their eyes a little bit, but we created essentially a virtual suggestion box process. But it's not like the usual crappy one where you don't ever hear anything back and nothing ever happens. I actually just a little bit ago this morning, every Monday morning, me and my leaders get together to review any new items or any open items, assign them to one of the leaders to investigate, and every single submission gets a response, whether we're going to do it or not. And then we create like a newsletter, essentially. It's an LMS that we push out to everybody to say, hey, last month, here's all of the things that you guys said, that you suggested, that you requested, and here's what we did. Here's the actual response that the individual got back, so they can see we care, we want to hear what you have to say. There's often really great ideas. There's things that surface that either we didn't know about, or perhaps we just didn't really recognize the importance. And so that is one that pretty routinely we'll have team members that will say, like, I love this process. I love the fact that you guys are listening, that I can get a response back from the senior director or the senior manager or whatever, right? And then one of the other things that is one of my favorite things that we do, and again, these are simple, like anybody can deploy these. This does not require investment or, anything like that. But we really leaned into peer recognition within the last year or two. Don't get me wrong, leader recognition is great. We should continue to do that. We should let people know when they're doing good work and all of that. But it just hits a little different when it's a colleague. And they're seeing things that others aren't seeing. And they're things that maybe you as an individual would never think are special. And then somebody goes, Justin, the way that you helped support me when I was struggling with that customer situation, like it hits different. And when we think about building these relationships and the connection to the organization and stickiness and feeling like we belong, having a colleague thank you and show their gratitude for something that you've done, it's really special.
Yeah. I've been fortunate to be part of organizations that have done some really great work around enabling peer-to-peer recognition to happen at scale. And the coolest part about it is it's cheap and cheerful.
Yeah.
Like it can have such an impact, and the investment to return ratio it's silly. I don't even think this is you should consider this. It's like, if your organization is not doing something to enable peer-to-peer feedback, don't leave it up to chance. Don't say, hey, people wanted to do it, they would do it. There's a lot of things that we all want to do, but we need to make it easier. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it clear and expected. And gosh, I think, leaning into that alone could be an exercise for organizations to positively impact their culture.
And it shouldn't be complicated. If you start to design a process where you're like, oh, this is going to be hard, like, nope, start over. What we do on a weekly basis, one of our managers sends out a reminder that says, hey, do you want to recognize a peer? They collect that and they get posted in a Teams channel, and the person that's being recognized gets tagged. And then you watch people just flood in there. This is the other cool thing. Flood in there and go, yeah, Justin is amazing. Oh my gosh, the way that he supports me when I have a question. And not only do you have the one person that's saying it, but then you've got a bunch of other people that are saying, I totally agree, and they're adding their own story. So literally, it can be that simple. Ask people to give you the feedback and then post the feedback, and you're done.
I love it. Jeremy, we are winding down on time. I'm going to ask you one last question. If you think about early in your career, Jeremy Hyde stepping out of HR into the contact center, what is one piece of wisdom that if you could go back and give yourself, you would do that?
Oh man, like so much probably, especially for me. I had some really great opportunities to learn and develop myself in those early years. One thing that for some reason I was reminded of when you asked that question was, I think there was a point where I struggled to see the value that people brought when it wasn't the same value that I brought. And, I don't know if that's an ego thing. I don't know if that's like lacking in self-awareness or what that is exactly, but it didn't put me in a great position to recognize like all of the talent that was surrounding me, and to recognize how we need all of these different types of skills in order to create this system and this team and this environment. And so just like opening up my eyes and kind of recognizing and specifically looking for, like, what is it that each person, the great thing that they were bringing to the table. It just, I don't know, it opened my eyes to a lot. It made me rethink the way I saw certain things. And so, yeah, I don't know why that one jumped to my mind just now, but I think that would be one, is like, be looking for the value and the strengths that people bring to the table and be looking for things that aren't the same as what you bring to the table.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think part of that for all of us is also being comfortable with where we are uh, weak,
Yeah.
being okay with where we're not okay. And I think the more that we also recognize and accept that, the more we find we may actually crave and want and need to be around and supported by people who bring the strengths and the perspectives that we don't have.
Mhm.
So that was a good one. That was solid way to end a contact center conversation on culture. If we could alliterate that anymore, I would be a happy person. Jeremy, it has been an absolute pleasure. For people who want to connect with you, maybe talk about this topic even a little bit more, what's the best way for folks to get in touch?
Find me on LinkedIn, Jeremy Hyde, Hyde.
I love it. Everyone, I'm Justin Robbins. This has been a Contact Center Conversation. Thanks for joining us. We will catch you on the next one.